if you want to have a similar marriage, same-sex marriage, you're going to have to write out a prenuptial in detail and create those rights and put all this effort into it. And part of the same-sex or differently sexed marriage recognition is so that you don't have to write up a contract every time you get married and have it be different and parsable, that it just defaults to what heteros currently have.
It's important to remember also that not all marriages are created equally. In California, we are a community property state, which, for anybody who doesn't realize, deals with division of property on death or dissolution of the marriage, which is suspension or divorce, as it's commonly referred to here in California. Community property states only exist on the West Coast. It's the 11 western states. The East Coast, they don't do this. Now, modernly, statute has brought about division of property so that they're more or less in line within states, but not even the states agree amongst themselves. There is no federal consensus, and there certainly isn't any state consensus on this. It's also important to note that in California, we don't have what they call common law marriage. You hold yourself out to be married, you act like you're married, you commingle your assets, and you tell people you're married. In some states, Texas, Colorado, many others, you are married.
Yeah.
Doesn't exist in California. So if my sister in Colorado holds herself out to be married, enters into a common law marriage, and comes to California, she is again a single woman in the eyes of the state, because they just don't recognize from one state to the next that provision of marriage. So it does come down to the economics, mainly property division. The benefits aside, we can legislate the benefits. California, I don't know, Sarah can correct me on this, I believe California has more large corporations that recognize same-sex unions and partnerships for the purposes of benefits than any other state.
Actually, I wouldn't know that, but I would assume it to be true. It sounds reasonable.
There are an awful lot. I mean, we've got a tremendous number of large corporations that do that here in California. So benefits doesn't need to come from the government by way of marriage. They can just say that benefits can be shared anytime there is this union. Civil union, marriage, whatever you want to call it. Cohabitation. If you want to share your benefits, you ought to be able to share your benefits. They're yours. You're paying for them whether you know it or not. You ought to be able to give them away freely.
It just goes back to your second point about incentivizing, the family unit. I don't understand how anybody can incentivize a family unit and then define what that family unit is supposed to be. Once again, it just delves back into the hypocrisy of the whole thing. That's it. That's all I want to say.
Good point.
Very simple.
At this point, I'm sorry we ran over time. It's 9:20, but I do want to open it up to questions for as many as you want to give for the next 15 minutes or so. Terry had one waiting. Do you want?
Okay. Federal law trumps state law. So what do you do with that one? If a state makes a law, it's not recognized, and the Supreme Court is going to finally someday do it, one way or the other. They will define it. Then what happens?
Let's take that one.
It's interesting. Federal law does not actually trump state law.
It doesn't?
No, it doesn't. And there are amendments to the Constitution that say that those rights that have not been specifically reserved to the Congress revert to the states or to the people. So Congress is very limited, constitutionally speaking, from what they're allowed to legislate or mandate. They have used things like the Commerce Clause, which I am not going to get into here because it is the most misused piece of legislation to bootstrap things into federal authority. Most things passed under the Commerce Clause are not commerce issues. It only allows Congress the authority to legislate if they believe it affects commerce in multiple states. And certainly, marriage and the transmission of funds or benefits would qualify under that, although I think it's a bad idea.
Okay, what happens when the Supreme Court gets it? Because somebody's going to test it, one way or the other. It's going to go to the Supreme Court. They will decide what happens when a state says, screw it.
Can I
What are you
address
going to do
that?
it the other way?
We already know what's going to happen. We've seen it happen in the past century. You remember desegregation?
No, not really.
Oh, you're too young. I remember it. I watched it on television, and plus my parents were from
I'm
Alabama,
not
so
saying it's good or bad, but when it is challenged, which it will be, and it will go to the Supreme Court, and if it goes against homosexual marriage, then what happens if the state says we're still going to do it?
if the state says we're still going to do it,
Yeah.
the federal government is probably going to say, well, okay, but we can't force other states to recognize that. Because it's
That's
because
basically my question.
it would be a matter of
State, like you've got 3 now, and they
Yeah.
basically say, "Hi, we don't care what the feds say. We're going to do it anyway."
right. And I think the federal government is rather inconsistent on this.
Well, we already have plenty of examples.
There will be a decision, one way or the other, somewhere in the next.
If I drive east on I-10, I am limited to going 65 miles an hour until we get out into the desert, and then I can go a little faster. As soon as I hit the Arizona line, that speed limit changes. Every state is allowed to set their own rules. What we need to do is make sure that the rules that they set don't violate the federal Constitution. California specifically, and it took me a moment to find this in my notes, Article 3, Section 1 of the California Constitution. The state of California is an inseparable part of the United States of America. That means we can't leave.
Darn.
And the United States Constitution is the supreme law of the land. So the federal Constitution does trump the state constitution and state law, but only in the issues that it deals with. It's not an open invitation to take over the state of California.
Okay, but when it is challenged, and you know it will be, one way or the other, that's all I'm just saying.
There are others. David Boyce, Ted Olson are geniuses when it comes to appellate law. Their entire practice involves Supreme Court law. They're far more qualified, but they're not here. In my humble opinion, equal protection is the way that this will get attacked under a federal standard. That the federal Constitution allows us the equal protection of the laws to all citizens. And here we're carving out a group to be either rewarded or disadvantaged, however you want to see it, under our law. But it is very much like the separate but equal argument.
Yeah.
And I don't know that civil union, and a lot of people, this is a hot button I'm sure, say that, well, that's separate but equal. That a civil union being the equivalent of a marriage is not quite the same. Well, if your benefits are the same, and the only difference is who sanctioned that union, whether it was a religion or the state, how is it really separate? That's just my humble opinion.
I have a question. If we finally do recognize gays being able to get married, how will that, if it will, conflict with the First Amendment free association rights? For example, in New Hampshire, there was a church that was sued by a gay couple because they refused to allow their church to be used for their marriage ceremony. They said no, so now it's going through the courts. And in New Mexico, a photographer refused to
To my knowledge,
somebody doing a civil union, and now they're being sued, and then the various lawsuits against the Boy Scouts and etc. How would that be handled?
to my knowledge, that church won its suit because the government cannot compel that church to do anything. Businesses are allowed to, well, that's because of the jury system. Sometimes you can persuade 12 people, just like in this state we persuaded 13 million to come to the ballot box on this issue.